Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Do we have any apologies?
Jo? No, there isn't any apologies.
No apologies. Okay. I will mention at the outset, because I'm likely not to remember to do so at the end, that this is Kate's last board meeting. In fact, it's her last but one day in this part of the system. And I'm sure you'd all like to join with me in thanking Kate for the huge contribution that she has made in the 5 years that she's been leading the West CCG. Big shoes to fill because, of course, Ed went before her. So there were huge expectations and a very broad and well-established path to step into, but to keep moving. And I think you'll all agree with me that she's been very successful at that, and that we will miss her very much, and that we wish her very well in her new employment, which does sound very much more challenging because we've been easy and gone along, haven't we? And but of course we all know the ambulance is quite a difficult environment, so they've got many challenges. So we wish her very well, and thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, everybody, for your support over the years as well. It's been brilliant.
Any declarations of interest? Oh, okay, thank you. Any hospitality or gifts? Not much about, is that? Okay, so on to the minutes of the last board meeting. I'm trusting you've read them because you haven't got time to do so now. Are there any suggestions for corrections of accuracy? Okay, then I propose that those are accepted as a correct record of that meeting and that we should move forward. Any matters arising? Okay, the action log.
There was just one on there for me about the WASAM boxes, and having gone through it with the team, these are now in all care homes. Some care homes have more than one. I think the use of them and the kind of support that the care homes need to kind of make them part of their business as usual, I think, is the challenge going forward. But they are out there, and there are a team that are supporting them. I think it's just the confidence that needs to be built in that becoming part of business as usual. So I think we can take it off, but I do think there's an ongoing piece of work around probably GP support for that, and I think there's some champions out there who are doing that already. So it's just it'll take a bit of time, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think so. Yes, I think we'll take that off now. Thank you very much. Mark it is done, and then we'll go on then. Ed, please, to a general update.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to echo your comments about Kate. I mean, Kate's been absolutely fantastic, much better than me, I must say, in the role. But she's transformed it. She's transformed it from where it was. I think the traditional NHS leader has a preference for community or primary care or the acute sector. But what Kate's done is that she's been able to bridge, I think, all of the sectors and partners, both in the NHS and in the local government and voluntary sector in West Suffolk, really impressively. And that's set us up, I think, brilliantly for the next stage as we move into the Integrated Care Board. We have a very strong alliance, and Kate's been absolutely at the heart of that and building a really collegiate culture, which I think is natural to West Suffolk. So I'm very grateful to her. As she moves into her new role, the Ambulance Trust, as we know, is for a long time sat on the sort of edge of the NHS in some ways, and I think that's how ambulances trusts are. But I think with Kate's leadership there, we'll see a much closer integration with ambulance services into health and social care and voluntary sector, and I think that would be an amazing contribution and step forward for healthcare if she's able to achieve that, and we'll be absolutely supporting her to do so. So for very exciting times ahead, and thank you, Kate. We will absolutely miss you.
Thank you.
And personally, I will hugely. So thank you. In terms of events since we last met, it's been a pretty eventful time, hasn't it? So on the 12th of December, the Prime Minister spoke, and the NHS was placed on level 4, which means that we're under directions from the national government, essentially, in the face of the wave of Omicron virus across the country. One of the main tasks that the NHS was asked to do was to accelerate the booster programme as quickly as possible during December, and in our system we delivered over 200,000 jabs across our ICS between the 12th of December and the 31st of December, which was an incredible achievement and was as quick as anywhere in the country, and West Suffolk did exceptionally well as part of that effort, so thank you to everyone involved in that. There's also been a monumental effort around surge planning and managing flow through the system and keeping services safe during this time. And whilst we've been under extreme pressure and have had some very difficult days, we have kept the service safe. And I think it's a great credit to everyone that we've done so. The system is largely kept on an Opal 3, whereas many neighbouring systems have been on Opal 4 or even major incident and critical incident. So I think that's a great achievement in a difficult context. In terms of legislation, so there is a delay to the implementation of the new health and care legislation for 3 months. So CCGs up and down the country will continue at least until July, at which point the integrated care boards will take over, we expect. The idea is that the integrated care boards will start to meet in shadow from April, and there's a significant recruitment process underway for some of the board roles at the present moment. And once those are concluded, we can then pin down the other roles too. Allied to that is a white paper on integrated care, which we don't yet know what it will say, but we're expecting that it's going to place a heavy emphasis upon place-based working. So I think West Suffolk is well positioned to take forward that white paper. And then final two things is that we will receive a first view of the staff survey in part 2 today, and whilst it's currently embargoed, so we can't share in the public, we've got some very positive results in that survey, so I'm really grateful to my manager and all the line managers and directors for the hard work they've put in to support that improvement. And then finally, just a thank you to Sheila Childerhouse, who's been the chair of West Suffolk FT. I guess for 3 or 4 years, Sheila is stepping down, and we really wish her very well in the future. She's been a great ambassador for West Suffolk and indeed the ICS as a whole, and she's a really delightful person and friend, I have to say. So we wish Sheila well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ed at this point? Okay, thank you. Right, on to strategy and service development, and I would like to hand over to Lisa, who is going to lead this section.
Thank you. So I'm just going to present the patient involvement paper, the Q3 report. So the paper presents the work that the team have been supporting across October to December 2021. They are a small team, and we are really.
Lisa, sorry,
Yep,
is there
okay.
there a patient story before that or not? Sorry, that's just me.
That's okay. I'm not aware of a patient story.
I thought David was going to do something as a story.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Brilliant. That's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that, Lisa.
That's okay. Thank you,
I was
David.
asked to give a little presentation. It'll only be a small one, so you can get onto your ones very soon. So yes, thank you very much for that opportunity. Can I just start by saying also give my best wishes to Kate, having worked with Kate over the last 5 years from the community engagement perspective. She's been very supportive, so good luck and the best of luck for the future for you. Yes, I was asked just to give some reflection at this time on the community engagement process that's occurred mainly through the Community Engagement Board group, and to perhaps give some thoughts about where the future is going in terms of how that happens. And I think, you know, when I was starting to think about this, I just reflected back on the time I've been involved with the community engagement group, how the public participation has grown. And I think we're going to see a very brilliant example of that afterwards with Lisa's examples of all the participation groups that are going on, partnership groups with various members of the public and patients. And in a sense, I think engagement within the West Suffolk CCG has developed over the years, and it's happened in terms of that participation in various groups, as well as particularly co-production, which is now a key component of how services are developed. But in terms of giving some reflection of the community engagement process itself, I must start by just acknowledging the work that Joe Finn and Linda Tuck and Nicholson did over the years, particularly at the beginning of the CCG, when they promoted the whole concept of much greater involvement with the public and participation, etc. And I am particularly remembering the way in which the new, at that time it seemed to be quite revolutionary, patient revolution events that occurred within the West Suffolk Clinical Commissioning Group, and how powerful they were, and how much I know that Joe particularly was so much a voice from encouraging those participative events. I was very struck when I first attended one on how open that process was, and how it was quite brave, really, I thought, of health to actually open itself up for public comments generally, no barrier to what was being said, and how that process was then managed. And it struck me that gave a good hint of the themes and the leadership of the CCG and the way that was going. So I want to just say a personal thanks for the way that happened. I'm sorry that hasn't been able to be continued, but COVID itself has been one of the main barriers for that. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't do in the future, and perhaps I'll finish off at the point of this presentation by saying that. So yes, as I said, Joe Finn and Linda also played key roles in a number of groups within the CCG and helped to put the patient perspective. And they've also helped to recruit new members for what's been the community engagement group in the West Suffolk area. And Joe and Linda have been particularly supportive of those members. And perhaps just to give yourselves a reminder of some of the membership of that group. These are all volunteers, remember. These are people who are willing to put themselves forward and give time and expertise of what they have. And I think it's been quite useful to see that you've got people who come from the business world, people who, for instance, might have been advising even the main Tesco's boards and various other national bodies, as well as just a small one-off private industry, private business. The voluntary sector were well represented and have been on that voluntary board, as well as local and parish councillors. Remember, we've had 2 mayors that have sat on that board and participated and helped to lead and give a perspective, if you like, as to where various initiatives are going. We've had 6 of the patient participation groups members there as well, from different participation groups, and of course various representatives from bodies like the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Church of England itself, and the ambulance service. So I think this wide mix of people with their work and personal experiences, I think, have provided a rich resource for the CCG to use in a variety of ways. And it's been pleasing to see how those members of the CCG have taken part in various groups and initiatives going forward. What's been interesting, of course, as being a chair recently of that group, has been that the backgrounds of those particular people will be vastly different from many people who have been brought up in the health and social care sectors. And there's been confusions at times and a recognition of the challenges that the health systems have. The complexity of those health systems at times seems quite bewildering and at times difficult to traverse. And I remember particularly business people looking with some amazement at the financial structures that the health system has to work within, and how on earth you can make sense of that and try and keep to within the boundaries that are being set by national government at different times. I think another component, though, of the CCG membership has been that people live and work within the West Suffolk area. They are local, and some of them have lived in those areas for many, many years. This means that they have been able to bring and would continue to bring local knowledge, local links, and which these can be invaluable when looking at the effectiveness and potential of health systems in the future. And I'd like to particularly point out, for instance, where this is value, I think, has occurred when you look at initiatives, particularly that have happened in Haverhill, where there has been a range of different initiatives that have got up and got going, of which the local community engagement group members have played a key role. So I think when I was starting to think about how public engagement can develop over the coming years within the new health and social care structures, we should be willing to learn from past experiences and move the service on. And as I said to you right from the start, engagement with the public, of course, is multifaceted, and the long list of programs will, I'm sure, show some example of that Lisa will be given in a few moments. The community engagement group has been involved in helping to plan for the coming years and how we move from the CCG to the Integrated Care Board and the Alliance sector and the localities. But I do think that the value of members, volunteers, like we've seen on the Community Engagement Board, can play, and are really wanting to play, an important role at a local level, helping to inform the localities in terms of the strengths, some of the challenges that those areas might be providing. And remember, there are a great deal of strengths that those areas can provide. And I suppose that brings me to a broader point, which is that I think the participation, for instance, as I said at the beginning, of the patient revolution, has shown to me that actually it was a bit like a board meeting of a company where you get the shareholders there. But the major difference, of course, is that the public are the shareholders. Everybody owns and is a part of the health service and the social care sector. There isn't another group of people, private business, that are going to be the owners of it. We are, the government, the people of the government, and the people of the country. And there's a great sense of, I think, pride in the health service and the social care service that is reflected in that. And we need to build on that. And I think the example of the current work with COVID and with the vaccination program and the role of volunteers shows the great strength that there is in this country to want to support the health and social care systems. So if I had to think, and I'm going to conclude at this point, if I had to think about what it is that perhaps will be important to not forget as we move forward, is that effective communication between the health system and social care system and the public, and vice versa, is critical. It's the way in which we can most of all learn. An openness of approach is also critical. We need to be realistic. I think the public need to know where there are boundaries and where that can develop or not. Trust, of course, and unfortunately we are seeing that at a national level at the moment, is absolutely critical. People do have to trust the people that are running the health and social care systems and know what they're saying is what they're prepared to do themselves. And we know what happens if that trust gets diminished in any shape or form. And finally, I think that when I've heard and spoken to various members of the Community Engagement Board, what they often say to me is, what we most of all really often want to know is what's actually happened when I made that contribution. Did anything happen to it? And when feedback has been given, and again, I'll go back to the patient revolution. One of the key components of those meetings was when the meeting got told, well, this is what you told us last year, and this is what we've done in the meantime. That is important. So feedback at a locality level to people who are participating will be absolutely critical. So I think at that stage, I'll just stop it. And hopefully that's not been too boring. Hopefully you found that interesting. And say thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? So I mean, I think it is crucial. Oh, Ed, sorry.
I mean, I think it was a great exposition of our history in some ways, isn't it? And it's important to record all of that work and that way of working for the future, isn't it? I think what we're describing is something that's effective and needs to continue going forward, and having that local perspective, having the respect of acting and feeding back on people's concerns, and not being distant, which I think is Andrew Yeager's question a few months back about there's a risk of losing that local relationship in any change process. So I think it's a really important moment. Thank you, Dave.
Kate?
I was going to echo what Ed just said, but also, and I promise I won't do this throughout the whole board meeting, but just to thank Dave, because he stepped into a space when we lost Linda and Linda moved on, and he's filled it brilliantly, as those observations have shown. And everybody with the clinical engagement group, as you said, David, gives their time freely and feels passionately about it. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that as an amazing resource that we've got as part of our system. So thank you for that, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's also important that the patient story part of the board goes forward into the new public boards, because a greater proportion of the membership of those new public boards will have less familiarity with those stories than do some of the members of this board. So it will be a really important teaching vehicle going forward. Now, Lisa.
Thank you.
Now we're going to do your report.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave. That was brilliant. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the paper in any great depth, but it does present a flavour of the work and the way that the team are working with our engagement groups and many other partners, such as our Suffolk Parent Carer Forum, our Maternity Voices Partnership, Suffolk Family Carers, many groups that build on the intelligence that we have within West Suffolk. So there's lots of examples of how we are trying to support the public and patient involvement into the alliances and our various programmes across mental health, CYP, learning disability and autism, maternity. There's lots of great examples around. The team is working really well with Maternity Voices Partnership and women and partners and people who are pregnant at the moment to support the co-production of our maternity and neonatal strategy. That's a really important piece of work because it will also inform our providers' maternity strategy. So lots of great work, and we're getting lots and lots of feedback through social media around how families want to see maternity and neonatal services and some of the priorities they think we should have. There's been a lot of work, as West will know, because St Nicholas Hospice has been doing a huge amount of the work with Andy Yeager around the single advanced care planning records. So lots of involvement around that. The vaccination programme, we've had some incredible work from the involvement team to really help us to understand users' experience of our vaccination processes and how we need to shape our vaccination clinics and efforts going forward, which has been really helpful. More strategically, there's a piece of work that they're leading on around our patient safety partner network. So patient safety partners are a key part of the NHS patient safety strategy, and the patient safety partners are looking at how can we support patients to improve their own safety, and then how do we make sure that patients are involved throughout all our programs and our work, supporting us and working with us alongside us on patient safety initiatives. So the team are leading a piece of work around a collaborative network so that we don't do this in isolation from providers, between providers and commissioners. So that's a really good piece of work. We've launched our engagement platform, Let's Talk SNE. That went live in October, and West Suffolk Alliance has a platform on there, which I think we're starting it quite slowly, but it's a real potential for using that, as Dave talked about, the local knowledge and how do we use community engagement to drive the agenda rather than as a consultation process. So that's great. We have just our normal business, really. The team, as you know, operate the PALS department. Over that quarter, they had 528 contacts to PALS, which the three key areas were around vaccination queries, access to primary care, and medication issues. Our MP inquiries have significantly risen in the last quarter, and again that has been mainly around access to booster and requests to support people with their personal vaccination records. And we've had 79 complaints, which is an area that we're really focusing on with providers to understand some of the key themes. I think just to complete, Dave talked about two things that I would have referred to as well. So that whole closing the loop, which is really important that we continue to embed. You'll know when we bought the strategy here, it's part of our priorities. But as Dave said, that whole what happened, what impact did that have is really important that we work through a process and we make sure that we're giving that feedback to our groups. And also, as I said, that local knowledge and how do we use local people and the communities to drive the agendas that we have in alliances and programme areas, rather than us developing the agendas and then wanting to co-produce and consult. So actually, how do we put the public more in the driving seat of the work that we do? But thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, all right. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on then to the Alliance update and Kate's report.
Thank you. We've gone for a different format given the level of pressure that the system has been under. So we've just pulled together a couple of slides. And as it's my slot on the agenda, I also just want to say, more broadly, just a huge thank you. I've been on such a journey in the last 5 years, and I think that the bit that has just struck me throughout is just the specialness of West Suffolk. I think we've got opportunity in bucket loads in terms of what we've achieved and can go on to achieve with a kind of extra string to our bow that the integrated care system and that kind of the join up being put into part of our DNA and our kind of foundation going forward, with Ed leading it. I think that's given a lot of the stuff that we've talked about for the last 5 years a completely different footing. So I'm excited to see where we go from here, and some of the fantastic personalities that we've got in the system that in the last 2 years during COVID have kind of almost taken on different roles informally, but has helped us push through the successes that we've had in our response and in the vaccination programme as well. So I think the future is very bright. I'm excited to see where we go from here, and just the plea is to make sure that we look after our brilliant team as well as part of that as we go forward. So if I can just present a couple of slides that were in the pack. As Ed said, the big priority has been for us since we last met in November around the vaccination, but also around our COVID response. So the numbers that we've kind of already rehearsed, I think we kind of need to let them hang in the air slightly, because we went from a vaccination model which has had enormous success, but also was moving into a different phase, to putting the foot fully back on the gas. And I just want to extend almost like a formal thank you to my primary care colleagues who literally almost overnight, it felt, rose to the challenge and actually came into that space. And between primary care, our community pharmacy and our vaccination centres for West Suffolk, we gave the capacity for 70,000 vaccinations during that period of time as well. And as always, our volunteers, our voluntary sector organisations and that kind of broader community also put their weight behind. And when you looked at how we were staffing the model, it was the most multidisciplinary approach I think that we'd had yet, in terms of staff being reprioritised, staff giving up their leave, and people just making sure that there was the opportunity for our population to access their boosters. And having spent time in the clinics, you also realise what that meant to our population in terms of them feeling that they had a better shot at having the Christmas that they wanted to have with their families. So I think we've almost, because it's something that we've had such an enormous amount of success in, we almost don't necessarily step back and think, actually, the size of the achievement is huge and the work that went into it is colossal, really. And the pieces that I think that have got the legacy attached to it are the work that we've done around how we target our pieces of our population that need a different offer. And I think we were able, with West Suffolk Foundation Trust and their dedicated team, we were able to look at how we tailored our model, and with our outreach work with our brilliant Katrina, our brilliant inequalities lead, we've made for going forward in the long term kind of a legacy around actually what we can do to tailor to those individuals who want to access their jabs but haven't necessarily had the right environment or the right ability to kind of have the time spent with them to get them into that place. I've included in the slides a case study about a young man with anxiety and autism, which I'm not going to read through because you've had it, but I think his mum's comments, and also having had some conversations as well with the team, her relief was palatable. I think she had been on a long journey herself, and being able to find a team who made her son their priority, I think, was fantastic. And the learning going forward is sort of broader than the COVID vaccinations. I think it's much more about our approach to this part of our population going forward, and the join up with Lisa's team and the kind of broader piece that's already underway, again, has helped from an integration perspective to make sure that we're not duplicating, we're just adding kind of more colour and more options to the what we've got in terms of level of service for our population, which is brilliant. And the other piece was around our response to the pressures generated from the Omicron variant, and also just the kind of broader resilience piece for a system that is under an incredible amount of strain. Paul will go through this in much more detail later in the agenda, but from the broader integration and the system perspective, to complement the tactical operational approach that had been put into place as a response, we stood up our system tactical conversations. And I don't know why I'm surprised, but I always am surprised just at the level of attendance and commitment we got from the very first meeting, for all of our stakeholders appearing and wanting to help in terms of what could we do differently to make sure that we are stopping our patients going into hospital and keeping them safe, and bringing them back into their communities. And also just making sure that where we had social blockers for people who needed something extra to get them home and into their own homes again, we were able to, whether it was a house clearance, whether it was just some additional community support from their infrastructure that is around them that they don't necessarily access routinely. Our district and borough colleagues, our voluntary sector colleagues, just stepped into that space. And because we have a fantastic muscle memory from what we've been through in the last 2 years, that felt almost as if it was something that was not quite business as usual, but people's confidence in what we could achieve together was different from our kind of first couple of times round. So it did feel very much like we were working as an operational team, much broader than our kind of normal set piece statutory services, to understand what we could do for our population. So there's some examples in there about what was mobilised, but I think my overriding impression is I think that we've now got a lot of a very strong evidence base for how the model of care that we provide in our communities isn't just about our statutory services. And I think that helps us hugely with what we commission, how we commission going forward. And coupling it with, as David and Lisa have so eloquently kind of outlined, understanding and listening to what our communities need and want, I think using the tools that are at our disposal now to help understand actually what the gaps are, and very often they aren't necessarily more doctors and more nurses, it's broader than that. I think we're very well placed going forward now as we move into our new governance model with the integrated care system to make the most of that, and understand how we kind of move our resources around to support the development of that part of our world. So that was all I was going to go through, Christopher. So happy to take any comments or questions.
Yes, thank you. I've got one, I think. That's a lovely story about the young gentleman with the vaccination difficulties. Unfortunately, I think everybody knows that there will be a number of people out there who perhaps didn't have quite such good access to quite such a supported process. And I think we don't want to open the floodgates, but I think it will be a kindness if privately after the meeting you will be kind enough to share, at least with the GP members of the board, the team that was and the access route, because I think some people will be very glad to know that for future. It may not be COVID, there may be other similar situations. I think if you'll be kind enough to do that, that would be very welcome, Kate. Thank you.
Yes, very happy to. And apologies if it's not already gone out, because they've been doing their own PR, so maybe that needs a little bit of support.
A lot goes out, I'm afraid, and sometimes things hit the spot in different ways, and this one's hitting the spot in a particular way, which would moisten the receptors for that information going around again. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Can anyone follow that? Possibly not.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So now we go to item 9. Oh yeah, Jeff, my apologies, Jeff.
Thank you, and thank you, Kate, for that update. I was just looking at the slide on mobilising community sector, and I was wondering whether this board or the clinical exec needs an update or a discussion around the future systems programme in the context of primary care and community services that's going to come out of the new project.
That's very timely, Jeff. We had a meeting yesterday looking at the future systems programme, and we had the future systems board, last week, I think. Sandy Robinson is going to be acting into the interim for my role, and what we've been agreeing with her is what she will bring to exec for the next couple of months, and that is one of them, and also the work that's been going on around community services and developing that model, which links into that as well, is a key part of it, because a lot of the conversations that we're having at the moment around the future systems absolutely are about the need for a new hospital, but a lot of what is needed in terms of the level of change is stuff that doesn't need to wait for the new hospital. It's stuff that we are already have as part of our Alliance delivery plan. It's part of what we are trying to roll out anyway, and in some ways tying it to a new hospital build might add an unnecessary delay. So I think, yes, coming back and talking to the exec about the Future Systems programme, but more broadly about the kind of changes that are being worked up just from how we work differently to understand how we deal with the level of demand that the system has at the moment. Victoria's very involved in the Future Systems piece of work, so she might want to come in and add to that.
Who's going to help us with that? Victoria?
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, Jeff, I think I just wanted to reiterate what Kate said. So I sit on the FSP and I sit on that community work stream. And I think a lot of what is going on is exactly that conversation, as Kate has just said. We need to be making changes now. And a lot of the work that's looking at the FSP and how we're looking to change things in secondary care relies heavily on things changing in community. And we're actually trying to roll out those changes now, see what works, see what we can do now, so that there is not just a big grand shift with this new hospital opening. It's actually about what can we build on now, what changes can we put in place early on. And also with some of the projects, we're looking at things and realising they won't work, other things we're realising they will work. So I think that work is very strongly ongoing. Whilst I'm still here, I'm also happy obviously to bring updates, but Sandy, as Kate said, is really closely involved with that. So that's definitely the community side of things is really being looked at very strongly as part of the FSP, and I think it's really reassuring the approach to it.
Thanks for that. I mean, obviously I'm on the FSP as well, and this area does interest me, so thanks for the update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move on now to item 9, the procurement update. Paul.
Thanks, Christopher. I'll take the fact that people have read the document, but just point out a few of the highlights. So at the last board, I think I reported to say we would be bringing a paper to clinical execs, which started to detail the process we would be following as part of the commercial procurement we are about to undertake. That's happened. It was approved. It's subject to a part 2 conversation later, and we hope to start the process in April. So some movement there. In terms of mental health, you'll note within the paper that part of the assurance process we have had some delays. That's in part because of business continuity, COVID impact, CQC visit, and other issues. Having said that, the teams are progressing and creating link, doing the work that they can, and to re-energizing the process, and we hope to bring the conclusion of that in the March governing bodies. At the same time, the mental health, learning disability and autism framework procurement is underway. Went out, I think, on the 19th of November. Returns have come back on the 14th, and the team are currently going through that. And again, would be subject to a conversation at governing body in March. And finally, the paper points out the fact that since awarding contract, the mobilisation of the dementia services to the Alzheimer's Society is underway. And we expect that to be completed, I think, by the 1st of April. So again, that is in progress. All done really under very difficult circumstances, given the our own business continuity program that we've been under as a CCG in terms of mobilising our workforce to support vaccination and other programs. So I'll stop there and happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, everybody's very happy with that, Paul. Thank you. Still then with you, Paul, but on to the finance, performance and scrutiny sections. The Suffolk System Resilience Level 4 National Incident Report.
Thank you, Christopher. I think this paper has been really well trailed throughout these meetings so far. but I think there's a bit of context. I think that's really important. So just as Ed has trailed, 12th December signalled in an escalation to level 4 nationally. And to be clear, that means that we are under direct national command and control duties. So essentially, national team will decide what it is we need to be focusing on, and we have to respond accordingly in a way that they request us to do so. I think, having said that, I think it's important to see this paper in the context of the extensive winter planning that we did and has been presented to previous governing bodies. So again, sincere apologies, but this paper is really focused on the elements of national direction that we've actually been given, rather than a wider context. And broadly speaking, the direction have been focused on vaccination, and I'll touch a bit on that in a second. We increase patient flow and safeguard our acute trust in the face of what was then a real potential impact on COVID admission and impact. And broadly speaking, was about protecting the gains that we'd made around elective activity and cancer services. So broadly, those were the main drivers really of the direction that came through. There were many others, but essentially those were them. So if it's all right with you, I'll just quickly touch a little bit on detail in terms of the paper, rather than go through the actual paper itself, because that would take quite a while. So the first few slides really sort of described what Kate has already alluded to in terms of our tactical structure. So we stepped up our TCG with system partners that meets twice a week and ensure that the direction we're given are being followed, and we are tackling any particular system issues. And again, I would say the level of support has been phenomenal across the system in terms of what we should and can do. And I think the reason I say that is again, Ed has trailed this, but many systems around us have been at level 4. Being clear up for level 4 means it's the highest level of escalation you can be before you get into a major incident. And we've been able to maintain that level 3, which is pretty unheard for us actually as a system. So just getting a sort of a signal of the pressure we've been facing. To support that, the alliances have really stepped up and meeting daily, sometimes twice daily, to support our acute providers, to iron out support, facilitate discharge, and think the impossible into what we can do best for our patient, maintain patient flow. So again, a very big thank you to people that have been involved in that. And then finally, just to be absolutely clear in terms of structure, this links into the wider structure, i.e., our wider partners, police, ambulance service, etc., are very much be part of that structure in terms of escalation support that we might have been able to ask for. Thankfully, we've not had to, but actually those links were clearly there in terms of and support already and waiting. So very quickly, just going through some of the slides and some of the key points that really that struck me as I was preparing this paper, I guess. If you look back, we've actually delivered 2.2 million vaccinations. That's pretty incredible, really, in a relatively short period of time. From the point of call of the booster, and again, it's been alluded to, but we've managed to vaccinate 84.5% of all eligible population for the booster in a very short period of time. I think that equates to like 500,000 jabs or thereabout across the system. So again, phenomenal response. And let's not forget, flu was also a real concern, and we've managed to vaccinate 60% of eligible population at the same time the vaccination program. So again, both of these top of regional performance in terms of what we've done, and again echoes what Ed has preluded. When you look at the urgent and emergency care pressures, again I've trailed up to level 3, but just to point out across the system. We had at the 30th of January, we had something like 187 patients with COVID positive patients. Now, to be clear, those are not admissions, those are patients with COVID in hospitals. But I think the issue here is not necessarily the number of COVID patient admissions, it is the operational difficulty that causes our acute providers. In other words, they may close 140 beds and have 30, 40 but they simply cannot use because of ICP issues, which again impacts on flows, impacts on flexibility and how we manage that. For West Suffolk, that's roughly translated in a doubling of COVID patients from, I think it was at 0.36 to about 86 patients. And given the challenges in terms of site and structural issues, West Suffolk have managed that tremendously well in terms of their ICP and how they've been able to flex, their bed base and manage those challenges. I'm glad to say that the numbers appear to be decreasing. We seem to be seeing some of the green shoots, and I think at last scan we'd gone from 187 to about 160 patients. So we are starting to see early signs of some of that pressure easing, but it is early signs at the moment. Similarly, we've seen some increased outbreaks in our care homes, which again, the link of that is our ability to discharge appropriately. And again, a tremendous amount of work has been done in terms of ICP supporting, ensuring that we do that safely. And the support from our local authority colleagues has been absolutely key in that. The big underpinning issue for us has been domiciliary care provision and a shortfall in that. And again, tremendous amount of local work on how we've managed to maintain and balance the needs of the discharge and our local authority and the need within the community. I think we've, as a consequence of that, just to finally point out, we have seen an increase in our journey times in our A&E department. In some respect, that's to be expected, but again, they've been managed within certain parameters, which have been certainly not worse in the region, certainly in terms of our performance. And finally, we have seen some ambulance delays. When you benchmark ourselves as a system compared to original colleagues, we are well within the tolerance zone that has been set in terms of monitoring. So again, we've done much better than some of our other system colleagues in the region. But having said that, the focus remains on that an ambulance delay is one ambulance delay too many, and we are trying to push that through ALO presence and support from our ambulance services and system support. So again, I'm trying to paint a picture that we've been under significant pressures across system, and people have rallied around to try and support that and improve the position. So we've responded in a number of ways very, very quickly. We've run a number of multi-agency discharge events, which basically means everybody involved that has anything to do with discharge is involved in trying to support patient flow. That's been hugely successful, a lot of learning from that. But again, we were doing 90% as business as usual anyway, but it been quite helpful in terms of getting those marginal gains that we needed to see. There's been some targets given to us in terms of system 50% reduction in delayed discharge, now 30%. We are chasing those, doing relatively well with those in terms of supporting those things. And just very quickly to give you an idea of the magnitude, we've opened an actually extra 81 acute beds across system. I think 28 of those were certainly at West Suffolk. And we've opened something like at least an additional 100 community beds at that point across the whole system. So again, give you an idea of the magnitude of support we've put into the system. And finally, support around virtual wards, support around our hospice colleagues and the support there, and around our admission avoidance schemes are absolutely key to actually improving the position. I'm not going to talk too much about tactical sales because Kate has really trailed it. But what I would say is the level of support, the level of integration, the level of joint come together to support the flow has been incredible. As I said to you, meeting twice a week routinely to try and provide that support. The other two key elements for me of the paper is workforce. We shouldn't underestimate the impact on workforce. Our sickness rate across the system has been roughly about 8%, and it's pretty even across the system. That's at least 50% more than we would expect normally through even a winter pressure. 50% is COVID related. Now, the good news in the sense that early prediction, we're predicting to almost like 25%. Thankfully, we've not seen that, and that's been really welcome news. But the challenge within our providers and wider system has been, including primary care, has been quite phenomenal, really. So in order to cope with that, we've put in mutual aid and standard operating framework, and I'm sure Amanda may want to come in shortly to talk about that. We've redeployed at least 236 staff of CCG to support vaccination, which again is part of the tremendous amount of support that we put into the system. And again, the commitment of our staff to actually do that, sometimes in their own time and giving up their leave, etc., etc. So, and I think finally the big issue for me is about the real focus on well-being of our staff, which is absolutely key to this really difficult period. But again, I'm sure Amanda may wish to come in shortly on that. And finally, part of the lessons learned around sort of previous COVID wave is the ability and need to carry on our urgent elective care, elective surgical care, and we've carried on doing that successfully throughout this wave, and also safeguard, if you want, our cancer work, and also try to continue to reduce our long wait, i.e. 104-week wait patients, and that focus has absolutely remained as part of this effort. And broadly, despite the fact we have cancelled elective activity as you would expect anyway through normal winters, we have broadly managed to keep things on an even keel in terms of that focus, and natural ask in terms of directions. So finally, I'd like to conclude really to say there has been significant pressures. The system, I shouldn't be, but I'm astounded at the level of response and level of support that has enabled us to maintain really where we've been, and to try and keep our patients as safe as we can, and keep services, importantly, keep services open. There are early signs that the pressures is easing, but again, we need to keep a very watchful brief, and we don't plan to stand down our tactical structure just yet, because it's too early, but we'll keep a watching brief on that. And finally, just to echo what I think people have already said, a big thank you to the system as a whole, public sector worker, voluntary folks, and probably a lot of people around this table right now in terms of level of support to maintain things on the even keel. So, Christopher, I've said a lot. I'll stop there, but I'm sure some Michael may wish to contribute to this conversation. Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of this all very important, and gives a very good picture of the system response. Thank you very much. Amanda.
Thank you very much, Christopher. So if I can just build on a couple of points referring to workforce that Paul has highlighted. So in addition to our 200 plus CCG staff that we redeployed from the beginning of December, if we look at actually how many across local government, we're looking at probably around 500 staff in total. So that's a tremendous success and accolade, and really underpins everything that we've discussed thus far, and indeed what Kate referred to in her earlier report. So that's really good news. And to support the mutual aid, i.e. the deployment of staff across the entire system, we have updated our mutual aid agreement, which is underpinned by a standing operating procedure. And that enables, hopefully, at more of an easier way of managing our workforce across the system. And to date, we have had a few system partners take advantage of that. And I'm confident that we can actually build and develop that model further, so it becomes a way of life as we move forward. In terms of sickness absence, the slides did refer to around 8%, and that was in fact true at the time of putting together. But I'm pleased to report we have seen a slight decline over recent weeks, and of 2 days ago we were reporting around 5.5% sickness absence. If we look at how that was a year ago, we were reporting just over 8%. So we have seen over the last 12 months a 30% reduction. A typical winter sickness absence is around 4.5%, so we're slightly above, but we are managing and starting to bring that down across all providers. So they were the key points I wanted to underpin, but I think a tremendous effort in terms of how the system has come together to deploy its workforce over the last few months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Zora.
Thank you, Paul and Amanda. My question does relate to workforce. I think it's really welcomed, all the support for staff. I was just going to ask a question about the mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff and how you think that's going to affect our workforce.
Thank you, Zora. I think there will be impact without question. And at the moment, we are working very closely with our providers across the entire system to look at understanding the current numbers ahead of the first milestone of the 3rd of February, and then what that might look like after. We have got significant numbers, I won't lie, Zora, but I think it's equally fair to say that each provider at this moment in time is doing all they possibly can through meetings, communication, training and the like to reduce. But to support whatever the end outcome might be once we have complete clarity on numbers from the beginning of April, we have at system level, again with providers, looked at how we can actually have a redeployment process. So at the end of the day, we try not to lose many staff, but more importantly, retain within the system. So We are just finalising our standing operating procedure. We have got a draft. We've had good comments back from trade unions and employers, and we're now starting to mobilise that so that we can ensure retention is a priority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Amanda, still with you as it happens, the governing body assurance framework.
Thank you very much, Chair. So here is our updated GBAF. And I think from the last time we went through, all of the risks continually have been updated. But if I can just bring out a key few areas. So in terms of our cyber risk, as we can see, NEL at CSU have now been awarded the Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, which enables us further as a system to have a greater degree of confidence in terms of the patching to prevent a cyber attack going forward. So I think that's moved in a good place with NEL and the IT team. In terms of workforce risk, we have updated again, and obviously the risk has been reflecting the mutual aid support that we've now put in place and how we have obviously supported the workforce to deliver the vaccination programme. In terms of a couple of risks that have reduced since last time, the EE's quality has reduced from 16 to 12, and the ICS white paper, given we now have a slight extension, we have now reduced that from 12 to 9. But in terms of the white paper risk, we continually are recruiting our ICB members, and we are currently in the process of recruiting to a number of executive director roles as well as non-executive members. And we are hopeful that that process will conclude around the middle of February, which will enable us to have a potential shadow board beginning of April. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ed?
Maybe you've captured it under the workforce risk, but the mandatory vaccination risk, does that require its own risk in its own right on the GBAF? Or?
Absolutely, Ed. Good point. Now, we are in the process of updating, and the next iteration is coming to JLT on the 8th of February, and that is going to be a new risk and a standalone. So it will come to the clinical scrutiny as a separate risk next meeting. Absolutely.
Presumably also those we contract with carry HR risk in going through the process of either redeploying or not redeploying. Do we carry any responsibility for those?
Not in terms of employment liability, Christopher, but I think our responsibility would be to ensure that we can do everything we can possibly can to support at system level to ensure that we retain where we absolutely can. So little things like drawing attention to vacancies and ring fencing vacancies to those members of staff is something that we would prioritise.
Thank you. Lisa?
Just on that theme, we had the regional East quality meeting yesterday, and obviously we talk about the vaccination of staff. So they are just having their second conversations with and they've got a number of staff that at this point do not want to have vaccination. And we were talking about, although obviously they can't be redeployed into a clinical role, some of those are clinical staff, and how as a system, if there are opportunities for redeployment, we can use their skill set. So I was thinking, Paul, when you were talking about EPRR, we know that the ambulance staff are very good at, as we know from Darren, we know that they're very good at emergency planning. And I asked EES, once they've got to the end of that programme of talking to staff, to talk to the systems that staff were working in, to have a conversation about how we might be able to utilise their skills, because it would be really sad to lose that expertise.
I agree, Lisa. And if I can just quickly come back, I do meet regularly with their HR director, and also we have a SNE VCOD group, of which the ambulance service is part of anyway. So that further supports what you've said.
And I think that would be the same, wouldn't it, across all our providers, across the whole system. They've all got similar issues, and we'd like to retain all the skills of all their workforce if there is unavoidable atrophy. Jeff?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Christopher. It's a question to Paul, really. Can I assume that the RAC issue is now stable? I know there's no update on this paper, but given that they're probably going to be opening up theatres after remedial work, I'm assuming things are going reasonably well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it's a really good question. So a couple of things. Yeah, absolutely. The remedial work for theatres has been ongoing, and it means I think they are able to reopen theatres, I think, in February to start up their elective programme again, which is great news, actually, in terms of patients and actually that needs to come through. In terms of the pressures, there has been a slight delay to some of the ward areas in terms of the opening additional beds, but I understand there's an absolute focus within the trust to restart that remedial work. So in terms of risk, which I think is a question you're asking, it doesn't particularly affect the risks in terms of that it's just been a slight delay in the process. But the trust are absolutely focused on restarting that work as soon as possible as the pressure eases. So it's been very much part of an ongoing conversation, ongoing risk management and conversation. But that's absolutely the right question, Jeff.
Thank you. Okay, so no further discussion on that section. Thank you very much. Item 12, the Better Care Fund Section 75 agreement.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So and we're presenting today for the annual approval of the Better Care Fund, which is put in place across the whole of Suffolk. So it covers the 3 CCGs in Suffolk, of which West Suffolk is one of those. So as it's hopefully the paper has provided you with a lot of detail here. It's based on a paper which went to the Health and Wellbeing Board, which I thought was really helpful. But just overall background, we reset the Better Care Fund each financial year. It has to be submitted for approval. The guidance came out very late in September, October time, with a deadline of November, which didn't really allow us to bring that to our last governing body, and hence it's coming today. In the meantime, it has been submitted to the national team, and we've actually received sign-off for it, so which is good news. But just to give some overall figures, the Better Care Fund, which is a combination of funding that comes into the CCGs, part of our allocation, it's ring-fenced for that purpose, and funding that's put into there through the various councils across Suffolk. It's totalling just shy of 92 million for the financial year, and that's in 3 pools, the West Suffolk element of that being 27.3 million overall. The paper, I think the most helpful bit is the strategic narrative, which is Appendix 2 and gives the overall summary of what the Better Care Fund is aiming to do across a number of different themes, and it's built on the work that's been done in the past. I just really like to draw the governing body's attention to plans in there for 22-23. I think there was quite a lot of frustration this year about the late guidance, and that leading to quite a hurried process around approval. So the team that look at this, that are predominantly working in Suffolk County Council with input from the CCGs, are trying to get ahead of the game for next year's Better Care Fund, and there are plans in place to be working on that already in preparation for that, which I think is a really positive move. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'll attempt to answer any questions, or certainly go away and find the answers if people have them.
Jeff.
Thank you, Christopher. Thanks, Jane, for that. I think I'm reasonably clear on that. Just a question, or two maybe, on the Schedule 1 table, where the funding is coming from. The CCG is the commissioner. We've got 2 items of out of hospital care for West Adult Services. Are they different different activities? Now, one's for 6.5 million and one's for 500,000. And the other question was on Birdsog, how that is progressing, because I've not heard much about that recently. Thank you.
So thanks, Jeff. On the first one, I will need to go away and get the detail on that. I've made a note of it, and I'll send you a response outside of the meeting.
And who would like?
Can I take the second piece?
Yes, somebody.
Yeah.
Did. Thank you.
Jeff, Birdsog is progressing via the community services redesign work. So we've taken the principles of Birdsog, and they underpin how the integrated neighbourhood teams and that the conversations we're having around the delegated kind of authority to those teams and how they work together is part of that. And so when Sandy brings back an update on that community services piece of work, which links into the conversations that you're part of as well from a future system perspective, I'll make sure she pulls out the links between the learning from Birdsog and what then is being rolled out across all of the six teams, because I think it's worth keep coming back to that, because it was a bold move that we made, and a lot of learning has come out of it, even if it isn't the purest Birdsog model that is being rolled out.
Thank you.
Any further questions on that? Thank you. Okay, so move on to item 13, the integrated performance report. Beginning with the Director of Performance Improvement.
So thanks, Christopher. I think you'll notice, I'm sure members of this board will notice that the report is rather lighter than it normally is. In part, that's why we did the system resilient paper, to try and cover essentially what is the current framework performance. So from my point of view, I've probably covered most of the areas I wanted to cover in terms of performance, but there are still clearly elements of quality, finance, and I'm sure Richard may wish to say a bit about transformation as we move forward. So I'll probably hand over to my colleagues at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on performance improvement before we leave that bit? Okay, thank you. On we go then to Lisa, please.
Thank you. So really just building on what Paul said earlier, West Suffolk Hospital have probably had the highest number of COVID patients across our 3 hospital sites in SNE. We've spent a lot of time looking at this, and we've had the regional IPC lead supporting West Suffolk, and my team have spent time at West Suffolk. It certainly isn't lack of grip or lack of adherence to IPC. Some of the root causes around the COVID patients has been the environment, the ventilation isn't great, and the ward design isn't great either for infection control purposes. When you look at Ipswich site particularly, they have doors on the bays, and has always allowed them to manage outbreaks quicker than West Suffolk. I think obviously staffing, as we've talked about, has really impacted on the ability to be able to always maintain tip-top IPC practice. It just does, and nobody wants it to, but it's as the staffing has been impacted by COVID, then we have given some support and recommendations to the Trust around the IPC, and also patient movement between wards, again, has been one of the root causes. But I am very confident that West Suffolk know what their issues are, and that there is a really clear line of sight from the patients that they have with COVID to the Director of Nursing. She knows pretty much all of them by name, and admission dates and transmission, etc. So hopefully, as we see the community transmission start to drop slightly, we will see, and there has been a drop, but they've still got around 60 patients with one ward closed and some bays closed on other wards, so it's still challenging. Staffing at West Suffolk Hospital, I mean, again, as Paul said, is probably their biggest challenge, but again, They are applying a really good risk assessment as to whether staff post-contact and post-COVID can come back to work. It's a panel that's chaired daily by an exec and a member of the IPC team, and they go through each individual member of staff's personal and professional role to do that risk assessment, looking at the hierarchy of controls that they can apply within that person's practice and whether it's safe to bring that member of staff back. So I think they are doing all they can. They are using the national risk assessment for safer staffing that has been disseminated by the CNOs. So everything they're doing is following the national guidance. The other thing I'll just say is maternity services, and I think they're really going from strength to strength at West Suffolk. The leadership team are doing really well, and there is a real level of confidence with them regionally and within our maternity board. They are exiting the maternity support programme. That's the national programme that is established for following CQC visits and inspections. And they've done incredibly well on their maternity support programme. They do have around 28% of women receiving continuity of carer. They are leading within our system. They're really focusing in areas of deprivation to make sure, and areas where there is a higher Black and minority ethnic community, to make sure that they are focusing their continuity of care and midwives where they could have most impact. We've seen their plans for further rollout, and that will be finally 100% in 2023, but there's a risk around workforce there. It does very much depend on being able to recruit midwives. The other thing I just want to say about West Suffolk is our quality oversight is really integrated now as a CCG with West Suffolk. So we attend their quality meetings, receive their quality papers, and it's just really helped to make sure that we're focusing, we have the information that we need and to avoid duplication. So that's really helpful. With other providers, you'll see in the IPR, we've really focused with NSFT on the CYP services this month, and it reflects the concerns and some improvements around eating disorder CAMS and ADHD, as well as the emotional wellbeing hub. So we have seen some progress, but there are still concerns around access into those services. Moving on to E-East, it's not so much of a problem in West Suffolk, but we have seen an increase in serious incidents with E-East, particularly relating from system delay, delays in attendance and conveyance due to a drop in the number of ambulances in the system and ambulances being queued and stacked at hospitals. That is much less of a problem, as Paul said, in our system and in West Suffolk, but we have introduced a system framework where there is harm and there are delays that have on the surface of it, and obviously until you investigate a little more you don't know, but on the surface of it have arisen due to ambulances being outside acute hospitals and unable to hand over, where the system is going to do the review because there's real system learning in that, and we don't get the learning from it with E-East looking at it as a single provider. So 4 ICSs have now signed up to that framework and are implementing in February. We just have some further work to do with our Norfolk and Waveney and our Mid and South Essex system, but they are agreeing in principle. They just need a little more time to work with their providers around implementing that. But just as a flavour, in November across the east of England there was 21 SR serious incidents reported, and 16 of those were related to delays in attendance and conveyance, and similar picture in December. So it really is an issue that we need to do collaboratively to make sure we understand the whole picture. And actually, as you know, is part of the NHS patient safety framework that we are an early adopter for, which will be rolled out nationally in April, is that system review of incidents where system partners are involved in the delivery of care, and it's not just one sole provider. The other issues, so for PPG, top 2 contacts remain, repeat prescriptions and dentistry would be one of the key quality issues that I raise most months, and continues to be the theme that comes through all the quality teams and some of our providers, is access to dentistry. There is a great piece of work happening with one of our team members, Greg from Paul's team, around looking at as SNE, how can we improve our urgent access to dentistry and our specialist services. So there's some really hopeful news that will come out of that. The other thing just to update you on is the COVID-19 therapeutic service is being delivered at West Suffolk. It has been really tricky for all of our acute providers. This is what we know as the NMABs, the antibody service and the antiviral service for people in high risk groups that are eligible to receive that treatment. It's been incredibly difficult because the modelling that we had obviously didn't take into account Omicron, and we were predicted around 4 to 7 patients a day across our 3 hospital sites that would require the treatment, and it's been many more than that. So it's been a real challenge for our providers as the models were hospital based because of the treatment and the requirement for phlebotomy and all those things. They were hospital based treatments that has been harder and harder for them to deliver with the surge of Omicron. But we've agreed a slightly different pathway now. So ESNEFT are providing the contacts centre for the system, and they are also going to be providing the triaging process, which will release some of West Suffolk's clinicians that became hugely tied up in the triaging process. They will still continue at the moment to deliver the service, but we are looking at an ICS solution because I suspect this will be a service that will continue to be delivering. Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Christopher.
Any questions for Lisa? Thank you very much, Lisa. Ed.
It's not a question, as I said yesterday, it's a bewildering amount of work that Lisa's overseeing there, but really delighted about maternity progress. I mean, that's a really excellent news. So thank you for relaying that.
Thank you. Okay, strategy and transformation, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. So starting with the most exciting update, planning. So we had the planning guidance come through on Boxing Day. So those of you, I'm sure, have read that after your Christmas meal the day before. Effectively, it is largely a continuation of the previous year, looking into 22-23, but do more faster. So a lot of the updates Paul gave in terms of the response to COVID, etc., very much correlates with the expectations in the planning guidance. So heavy focus on 104-day wait, ending them, which we should be doing anyway, and more broadly a significant increase in activity, both in diagnostics and elective, as well as a continuation of all the work we've been doing around the response to COVID. There isn't a great deal that's new, but that doesn't mean, obviously, within our ICS and our alliance that we aren't still ambitious in terms of our strategy and our transformation work that we've got underway. We will be carrying on with that. couple of other updates on elective. We've been fortunate that there is likely to be a regional capital allocation for elective, and we're in the process of pulling together proposals across our two main acutes, so West Suffolk in this environment, and we've got a process over the coming weeks to effectively work through what those proposals will be going into a regional process. So I'll be able to update the executive when we've got further news on that through the end of February. But Newmarket is likely to be the proposal, further develop the Newmarket site, and colleagues will be aware that they got planning permission, outline planning permission for further developments at Newmarket, which was positive. Paul's already updated, I think, through the paper around procurement, but we're reaching the culmination of the mental health, voluntary care and social enterprise framework. Really pleased we've had a really good response to that. So you recall that we updated previously at executive around the fact we wanted to develop a mental health framework of which we could call off when we had particular pieces of work where we could basically go direct to a number of organisations that are already on that framework, that commissioning framework. So we should be able to update again more fully on that through the executive. And we're also still plugging away with the assurance process more broadly with the Alliance around the mental health programme. There has been a delay, partly due to the COVID response to vaccination, but we're starting that up again. And we are in the process of firming up what a mental health collaborative would look like for Suffolk. John Reynolds in Paul's team's been doing a great job of coordinating that work with key partners. We're also due to start on the 14th of February, two big reviews, one on learning disabilities and autism and one on children and young people. And that's they're joint pieces of work across Norfolk and Waveney ICS, our ICS and the County Council. So the reason Norfolk and Waveney are part of it is because of the Waveney dynamics. So effectively, we're looking at a Suffolk county-based approach to how do we work more collaboratively, more closely with integrated programmes in both those areas. And we've got some external support on that that's due to commence shortly. Two launches that are happening in actually the coming days. The first, I'm pleased to say, we're finally at the point with neurodevelopmental to actually move into the actual full model. And again, we'll be bringing a deep dive into that, I think, at the February executive, just so exec members understand a little bit more and can ask questions around what does that mean in practice, because I know it's some time since we discussed it. But effectively, that's a fundamental change in the pathway from what we've had, which has been quite fragmented and disjointed, to something that's more integrated across the various partners. And I'm really pleased after 2 to 3 years of work, that's finally reaching a point of which we're able to launch, including with Bernardo's, NSFT, West Suffolk and the CCG. Also pleased to say, again, after a long lead-in time, we're fully recruited now to the CRIS service, which is the Children's Crisis Service that we agreed as a governing body some time ago. And that's a joint endeavour between the County Council and Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. So that will absolutely help with those children, young people and their families who are in a crisis or exacerbation of need. And that service will be providing not only support virtually, but also face-to-face in young people's homes. We're looking to further that again, also with looking at potentially short breaks, also for not just those with learning disabilities and autism, but also mental health. And that'll be something I think we'll be looking to bring through to the exec for consideration. Just turning briefly to cancer. So some further good news. We had our ICS Cancer Board, and Andy's, I think, is Andy with us? We had the Cancer Board last week, and really good news on one of the performance elements, which was dermatology, that we have struggled with in terms of performance on 2-week weights. With some of the changes that we've put in around skin analytics, within 1 month between October and November, the trust went from around 30% to 80% seen within 2 weeks. And that's continued over December and into January. We have got some further focus work to do on breast, and there's going to be another get together between a number of our leads and the trust, both clinical, operational and commissioning leads, around what we might be able to do in terms of our current breast pathway. And then just as we've touched on, I think, a deep dive previously at the exec on the emotional wellbeing hub, some further good news, but more work to do insofar as the red and the amber rated cases. they're absolutely on top of. We've got 1 day maximum on reds and 2 to 4 days on ambers. Actually, I don't think they're waiting much at all, is the latest intel I've had. In terms of the green, you remember the backlog. We've the Trust and Bernardo's, who are working with them, have reduced the overall list by 44%, or just over 1,000 cases since July, when the real focus work started. We still have 1,290. That was as of 2 weeks ago. But linked to the deep dive we'll be bringing to the exec on neurodevelopmental, we've got some further launch of the crisis helpline that Bernardo's will be providing for a year pilot that we agreed previously at the executive. And around 40%, we think, of the activity that comes into the hub will actually be supported by Bernardo's through that function, which will effectively mean we can free up more capacity to focus on that 1,290. So I'm confident that we will continue to reduce down that 1,290, and we're just working through what a reasonable trajectory is to get down to around 400, which is a stable number for them to manage. So that's probably a bit of a flavour, Christopher, of some of the work going on. Happy to take any questions.
Questions? Thank you, Richard, very much for that lightning tour. Everybody's knocked into silence, so we'll capitalise on that, I think, and move forward to, and thank you, Richard, once again, and we'll move forward to finance, Jane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So included in the pack is the finance report up to the end of month 9, so the end of December. We're obviously getting fairly well into our financial year now. And the good news is that we are on track to achieve our break-even plan following our reclaims from the national funding pots for hospital discharge programme and elective recovery programme. We went through the month 9 figures in detail at the finance committee next week, so I'm not going to read out all the bits of the report, just to re-highlight for the board that although it's been quite a tight financial year, we've through the work of the finance committee and overall additional funding allocations, are pleased to say that things are on track for the year. The variances are highlighted in the report, and there's nothing in particular to point out. The Finance Committee spoke in detail about some of the pressure areas, such as continuing healthcare and prescribing, and we are looking to bring a report back through exec on prescribing overall. So moving on to next year, Rich has already spoken about the fact that the planning guidance is coming out in dribs and drabs. We are expecting the finalised allocations for 22-23 over, well, it's been promised in the last couple of weeks. We are expecting it, expecting those this week. There's not much change in the drafts that we've received from the monies that we've had in the current year. It looks as though it's a if to use the technical term, an H2 times 2, so effectively the monies that were received for each CCG for the second half of the year, with some technical adjustments, we're expecting to be doubled up for the full year for next year. Obviously, we are working towards what that looks like for the first part of the year, where we're expecting to be in the individual CCGs, and the combining of those into the ICB in due course. So hopefully by the time we meet in March, we will be in a position to bring back what those look like in terms of budgets for the CCGs as part of the draft plan sign off. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and see if there are any questions.
Any questions? We've been through it all in quite a bit of detail in the Finance Committee, haven't we? So I think those who were there will have the understanding of it. Thank you very much. I propose cantering to the end before we take a break between the two meetings. Is that all right? Okay, thank you. In which case, Amanda, if we could receive the Freedom of Information report, please.
Thank you very much, Christopher. So here we have our standard Freedom of Information report taking us up to the end of December. Nothing unusual to report. We on average continue to receive around 20 requests of information, all of which are responded to within the 20 working days. There is no real kind of request that is over and above anything else, but we continue to log and publish on our website. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Amanda? Okay, on we go. Jeff, the minutes of the committee meetings.
Thank you, Chair. There's been 4 main committees in the last period: the Audit Committee, the Remuneration Committee, which is an extraordinary committee, COVID, the CRAC Committee, the COVID Resource Committee, and 3 meetings of the Collaborative Committee. So I'd ask the committee to endorse those minutes. I think I'll just say a couple of words about the Audit Committee. We had a fairly full agenda. We covered an external audit briefing. We had received internal audit reports, which were all good in terms of substantive assurance. We had a review of the 2021 close down procedures to ensure everything was in order for the 21-2 close down. We agreed detailed financial policies for the CCG, which will then find their way into the ICB. We also took assurance from the ICB transition work, including the finance transition work ongoing, and we also received the report on information governance and the GBAF. So a fairly full agenda, but all pretty good to report to the main board. The extraordinary meeting of the Remuneration Committee considered about 6 policies all ready for the ICB, which we commented on and agreed. So I think all in all, everything is reasonably in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for Jeff? Okay, thank you very much. The next governing body meeting is on Wednesday, the 23rd of March. At the commencement of this meeting, I had not received notice of any questions from members of the public. Jo, does that remain the situation?
Yes, I haven't received anything.
Thank you very much. In which case then we close this public governing body meeting, and thank you very much to all who participated. Shall we reconvene on the other link